Okay, 6:03, we'll get going. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming again. Um, I guess we'll keep on doing this until all the hostages are back, if that ever happens. We'll get to that in a minute, obviously. So, where do we stand today? Yesterday was another one of those emotional days with ups and downs. It's hard to fully encompass all the feelings at the moment. Uh, First and foremost, of course, was the shock at seeing the hostages as they got out of the cars yesterday. It was hard to recognize them, quite honestly. And people who knew them well even said they weren't sure who they were. Some of their own family members, when they first saw them get out of the cars. Obviously, it soon became clear who was who, especially since we knew the three names in advance. If we hadn't known the three names, I'm not sure we would have been sure who had just gotten out of those cars. Uh, It was a surprise. It shouldn't have been. The surprise probably was relatively how good the earlier people who got out looked, how well they were doing, and how well they seemed to be. Maybe Hamas put greater effort at feeding them more right before they got out. The others, with the exception of the one 80-year-old man were basically younger people, especially the young women. They, I'm sure, went into the captivity in better shape than some of the older people who came out, although in the case of one of them yesterday, he was not that old, obviously, either. Um, it shouldn't have been a surprise because the army has been warning for a while. The fact that the conditions have been terrible. What was considered it's hard to list them, but one of the most absurd comments that were made from Netanyahu's office yesterday is how shocked he was at the conditions of the hostages when they came out. Um, is was It should not certainly have been a shock um, to the people uh, who knew, and Netanyahu was certainly a person who knew. He understood a little bit too late, although I don't understand why he didn't understand it along the way. The fact that he was sitting in a deluxe hotel suite in Washington when all this was going on was not going to play well in Israel. His base doesn't care. I mean, I'm not sure how big his base is exactly. It's larger than it was the day after October 7th. He was able to actually lose some support then, but he's gotten some of it back. But some of the people he can do no wrong. He and President Trump have something very much and similar in that way. But to the rest of the country, it was obscene, frankly, that he was in Washington in a suite and with no reason at all to stay in Washington over the weekend. Everyone knew he would stay because every single trip he's taken to the United States, he's managed to extend it over the next weekend. But despite that fact, it was a bit obscene to see. The reality, the reality is it underscored to those people who care that we have to get out all the hostages as quickly as possible. And regardless of the cost, which we knew all along what the cost would be, we knew all along what the cost would be from the first day of the war. Nothing has really changed since then. And if we're not willing to pay that cost, then we need to admit the fact that we're willing to allow some percentage of the hostages that are alive to die in the caves. And at the moment, it looks most likely that Netanyahu is not planning to go to stage two of the deal. He may not even finish stage one, or he may force Hamas not to finish stage one. He's going to try to engineer it in such a way that Hamas is the one who tanks the deal, even though in fact he's the one who seems to be trying to tank the deal going forward. I was surprised a little bit. I thought he had decided he was going for the deal at this point. I thought he had decided that he was going to go with the Saudi deal, go all the way with peace in some form or other, saying a couple of nice words about the PA and go out with a bang, so to speak, with a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. Clearly, he decided not to do that. Did he decide not to do that because Trump couldn't deliver Saudi Arabia in the way he was hoping? Because the deal with Saudi Arabia was more complicated than he was hoping? Did reality actually change? It's hard to know, but it really looks quite clear at the moment that um, he has no interest in finishing this war at this point and getting the rest of the hostages back. I mean, sure, if he had a magic wand, he'd like them all back. But at this point, I do not see him paying the price. And the price is, of course, ending the war, and it's releasing more murderers from our jails. Now, I have really two big problems with the position of the people who are against the deal. I understand some of them are dealing from actual ideological views that we shouldn't release murderers in response to getting out hostages. And we probably made a mistake going all the way back to the deal we made with Jabril, which the Jabril deal, which goes back to the Rabin period. But each time that we agreed to release people in return for hostages being held, the price has gone up. Actually, this time the price is much lower than it was. If you compare the deal now with the Shalit deal, these prices are, I don't know, well, cheap, but inexpensive. The problem I have with the whole approach is that let's assume we're going to allow out 8,000 terrorists from all our prisons, or I'm not sure what the exact number is, but it's a big number to get all the hostages back. We're going to end up giving up a couple of thousand, at least, murderers are going to be released. But does it make a difference? There are 25,000 murderers right now in Gaza who would love to kill all of us if they could. And there are another X thousands in the West Bank and various places that would love to kill us if they could. So allowing a few more thousand, of which maybe 100 or 200 or 500 or even 1,000 might return to terrorism, is not going to make a big difference in the ultimate number of people who want to kill us. Will it make a difference is getting back those of our hostages who are still alive. And it's our responsibility to get back every single hostage that's still alive. The idea that we're leaving them there for so long and we could have gotten them back earlier is atrocious. And it goes against every value that the state of Israel has claimed all these years and every value that a lot of people share in this country. There are two issues with the second stage. One is again giving back or giving up more murderers, and number two is of course the fact that we have to end the war. But we've ended the war. No one, if someone said, well, we could go back to Gaza, and I have this unbelievably great plan that in 3 weeks we're going to destroy Hamas. They'll be gone. They'll be gone forever because we're going to go back in and do X, Y, and Z. Okay. I mean, I think it's a good idea, but at least it's an idea. It's a plan. It's a plan that can be executed. Now, uh, I don't know if I'm not privy to all the plans that the IDF may or may not have, but to the best of my knowledge, there is no plan. There's nothing that could do to go back in Gaza and do anything else but what we've been doing until now. Like we went into Jabalia for 6 weeks. We'll go into the central camps for 6 weeks. We'll go into who knows where. We don't have an army large enough to occupy all of Gaza at the same time. We're not going to get an army that large, even if we wanted to. It'll take years to build that army. I'm not even sure it's a good idea, but we'll leave that part aside for the moment. There is no plan that can defeat Hamas in the way that we're talking about, total victory. Is there a political plan that could remove Hamas from power? There might have been, but it's pretty hard to suddenly come up with a plan a year and 4 months into the war and say, well, now I'm going to have this plan that's going to work this time. Can we starve the people of Gaza now and say, well, we're going to turn off all the aid until Hamas leaves? Don't think that's going to go over that well, even with the Trump administration. I mean, it's possible, but I don't really think it will. Not to mention, since we've been letting them have 600 trucks a day, which is about 300 more trucks a day than they need to survive, they've been accumulating plenty of food and other things at the moment. And we only have to look at the pictures from Saturday and look at the civilians and the Hamas fighters and look at their faces, look at their bodies, and look and say, this nonsense that was going around the world that was starving the people of Gaza was that nonsense. I'm not saying it was beautiful to live in Gaza. I'm not saying I'd want to live in Gaza. I'm not saying I'd want to eat the cuisines that were available in Gaza. But starvation, that was not taking place. And that was just a lie that was being fostered on the world. very successfully, I might say, by Hamas. But it doesn't change the fact, no one's going to let us turn off the water, turn off all the food deliveries, turn off everything to Gaza. I just don't see it. I don't see it being possible. And for what goal at this point? For Hamas to surrender? Do we think Hamas is willing to surrender? I don't think so. These people are not the surrendering type. They are not. We think back at Arafat when he agreed to leave Lebanon and go to Tunisia. That was a surrender by Arafat in Lebanon. But it's not the same thing at all. Arafat was not Lebanese. Arafat was a guest, quote unquote, of the Lebanese people. He was an external force sitting in Beirut. He was not Lebanese. Um, it's because Hamas is not about to surrender. It is Gazans. It's made up of people who live in Gaza. They hate us. They all hate us, or a high percentage of them hate us, or a very high percentage of them hate us. That is Hamas. That's the people in Gaza. They all hate us. Let's keep that in mind. They're not a group of people we're about to make peace with anytime soon. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they're not going to be defeated anytime soon. And there's nothing we're going to do we'll kill some more of them. We can kill even some more of them. We can kill even more of them from the air, from the sea, who knows how. We can kill more Gazans. Is that going to defeat Hamas? Is that going to bring us to peace? Is that going to bring us to anything? Hamas doesn't care about deaths of their people. Their people become Shahidim, excuse me, when they're killed in battle with us, or not so much battle if we just kill them. There's a religious element that we forget sometimes, and it's a significant element on all this. Hamas is a religious organization by its definition. It's not a secular organization. The Palestinian Authority was secular. It's still mostly secular. It makes other calculations when it decides what to do and what not to do. Hamas is acting in the will of God. People acting in the will of God do things in a different sense, in a different sort of circumstances and decision making. And we need to keep that in mind. So any of this nonsense we're gonna have absolute victory, especially now after 15 months. If this was the first month, the second month, we all sort of believed we could have total victory over Hamas. We didn't fight it the right way. That's a different argument altogether. We also believed that we'd be able to rescue the hostages, which didn't turn out to be the fact. So the reality is, if we care that these people who we left to be captured by Hamas a year and 4 months ago, if we are not willing to do the most to get them back, and yes, the argument being made, I listened to one of the people from Otzma Yehudit, that's Ben-Gvir's party last night, explain why he opposes this deal. He says, because if we go through this deal in 5 or 10 years, and October 7th is going to happen again. Well, the underlying problem with that argument is assuming we can't do anything, that we're going to sit back and allow another October 7th to happen, and that in 5 or 10 years it might happen again. Well, guess what? Those people who are being held right now are going to die next week, next month, and the maximum in a couple of months. They're not going to live to see 5 years or 10 years or anything else like that. In 5 or 10 years, no question, the Hamas is going to do all they can to come back and kill us again. People in Gaza hate us. Let's understand that. Dayan, I published it, I think, twice. Dayan's eulogy to Rothenberg in 1954, when he talked about how much the people in Gaza despise us, sitting there in their refugee camps in Gaza, looking at the green areas of Nahal Oz and the other kibbutzim along the border. He wrote about that in 1954. We're now, how many years later? They hate us even more, much more. Okay, they hate us. We have to make sure they never come and hurt us again, and that's our responsibility to make sure it never happens again. But in the meantime, we have people there who need to come home. They're not going to live much longer, some of them. We look at the people who came back yesterday, and you just wonder, how much longer could have they held out? Another month, another 2 months, 3 months? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I can't say for sure how much longer they could have held. But at some point, they would have gotten sick, or they may have been struck by something else, or they may have just died from malnutrition. All those things could have happened, or will happen to those who are still there. So we have a responsibility to get them back, and we need to get them back as soon as we can. And I won't say at any cost, but at the cost that we've agreed to. Keep in mind the fact that we're already violating the agreement. As of the agreement on Monday of last week, we were supposed to send a negotiating team to negotiate the second part. At the moment, we sent a team to deal with technical issues relating to the first part today. The Security Cabinet may meet on Tuesday, maybe not on Tuesday, to discuss giving approval for a mission to discuss the second agreement. And as I understand it, the second agreement, we're only going to agree to bet the second agreement if Hamas agrees to leave Gaza. So I don't know what to say. It's the level of frustration, anger, sadness on so many different levels with no real solution to any of it for the moment. Anyway, to leave that and go to a slightly other topic, which was President Trump's plan for Gaza, which is now no longer an immediate plan, but a plan that can happen someday, the real estate deal of the century, however we want to define it. Look, I give him credit for something different. The reality is we've been stuck in the same problem since 1947 or maybe 1936. The partition plan, dividing between two countries, two nations, two entities. One entity accepted it and one entity has never accepted it. Now, I don't know of any other solution that's possible. I also don't think that solution is possible at the moment, as I've written many times. But I think that we need to, at least talk about these other options, think about these other options. I don't know. I don't really know what the other options really can be, because a two-state solution might happen someday, but no time soon. No Israeli that I know of, including the members of Meretz, which is the left-wing Zionist party. They're not ready to. They won't accept a Palestinian state at the moment. And they're not willing to accept the Palestinian state at the moment. Who on the Israeli political spectrum is? There is nobody on the Israeli Zionist political spectrum that says that for the moment the solution is going to be creating a Palestinian state. Someday, yeah, someday that would be a good idea. I think it's a good idea too, someday. But before we get to that day, we have to ensure the fact they don't want to kill us. And I'm not sure how we get to that point, quite frankly. I don't know how we go from where we are to where we need to go. Part of it, and I think I've mentioned it before, is the fact that 10 years ago, when I thought the world was getting less nationalistic, less religious, then I thought there was possibilities, because these wouldn't matter as much. But in the last 10 years, and we can have a discussion on what's caused it, but in the last 10 years, the world has become more nationalistic, more religious, and both those things work against us. They work against the solution between Jews and Muslims, in the case of Hamas, which is a religious organization, and more nationalism works against the idea of a solution between Palestinian nationalism and Jewish nationalism. So I'm very pessimistic in terms of where we go. I'm pessimistic in the short term, and I'm fairly pessimistic in the long term. With I'm an optimist by nature, so I refuse to be totally pessimistic. But anyway, going back to the Trump plan, I mean, he threw it out. It's an interesting idea. It's based on very little in reality, like most of what he throws out. It brought a new discussion for a while, which is a good thing. Discuss different things. Maybe it's a negotiating ploy and says to the Palestinians, look, if you don't accept X, you're going to end up with Y. That's a very good negotiating ploy, if that's what it's all about, and if it doesn't have the opposite effect. And that's the whole thing we're talking about. We're dealing with people who have religious beliefs beyond just nationalistic political beliefs, that what we've managed to do is unite all of the Sunni Muslims against this plan and against any sort of idea, and pushing them again that the Palestinians deserve their own nationalistic location. And we also go against, I think it was Netanyahu today who talked about this space in Saudi Arabia for the Palestinians. I mean, do we want it? How many countries do we want to turn against us by suggesting they take Palestinians? Look, this whole problem wouldn't have existed if in 1949 at the end of the War of Independence, the neighboring states or states further away had said, well, this is what happened. There was a war. Like all wars, refugees are created. There are 600,000 Jews left Arab lands and came to what is Palestine, what is now Israel. And there were 690,000, give or take, Palestinian refugees who left Palestine um, because of the war. We'll now resettle these 690,000 people in Morocco, in Jordan, in Lebanon, and wherever it might be. And they'll become full citizens because, after all, ethnically and religiously, there's no difference really between a Palestinian, certainly back then, and a Jordanian and a Lebanese and a Syrian. But no, do you realize that to this day in Lebanon, Palestinians are barred from being doctors? And I can give you a whole list. There are like 40 professions they're not allowed to be. They're not full citizens. And they've been living in Lebanon now since 1949, 48 in some cases. So this whole problem was created by the fact that the Arab states were never willing to accept the Palestinians as co-citizens and resettle them in their countries. Now, do we think that now, after all these years, when the Palestinians do have an identity, whether we like it or not, there may not have been anything called the argument of some of the Israeli right is there's no such thing as Palestinians. Well, they're right. Historically, there were no such things as a Palestinian. But that's irrelevant because what there never was is not relevant to the fact that for whatever historic reasons, certainly since the 1960s, something that's a very clear Palestinian identity has been forged over these years. Maybe since 49, maybe it was the actual, leaving Israel, what they call Nachbas forged an identity, but more probably from the time the PLO started and over the period of time, there's clearly a Palestinian nationality at this point. We can ignore it, but it exists. So we need to realize that it does exist, and anything ignoring it doesn't help us. So I don't see any Arab states, despite whatever pressure President Trump might exert. I don't see them doing anything other than something symbolic, and even if they do that, it's very unlikely. So his plan is very nice. We would all love to see Palestinians leave Gaza by their own will if they were willing to. But if it was 10 years ago before the refugee crisis in Europe, Europe might have taken them. But today, Europe's not likely to take any more refugees. I mean, not likely, it won't. Obviously, the United States is not ready to take any refugees. It turned off all refugees completely. So that's the reality. There is no place for them to go. So we'll have to see. Again, the problem exists that we didn't have a plan, and I've been saying that all along, and we still don't have a plan. And when Netanyahu said, this is our plan, because Trump came up with not a plan, an idea. I don't know. Pessimistic to say the least, and we'll have to see. Beyond that, what's clear is that Netanyahu did not get what he was hoping for in terms of Iran. President Trump is not going to go along with a joint strike against Iran, at least not at the moment by us, and is not going to strike themselves. Iran may be stupid because as of today, they said they will not negotiate under pressure from President Trump. If the Iranians spit in his face, I don't know what Trump might do. Going back to the plan, was it the Tochnit HaMeah, which is the plan that Trump had set in the pan of a century that he had for a peace with us. I remember I was on a panel with some people from the Palestinian Authority back then, and I said to them, just accept it, and then negotiate. Don't say no. Say yes. You have a history. Your history of your people is always to say no, and you keep on saying no, and you're once again going to say no. If you would say yes and then negotiate it, you may not like the details of the plan, but say yes but no, they continued their rejection of anything that wasn't 100% what they wanted, and instead they got nothing. I guess from our perspective, thankfully, I don't know, maybe we could have had a peace. I don't think so, but same with the Iranians right now. They'll be idiots if they say no. They'll be smarter to say, "Oh, we'll be happy to negotiate." Oh, and Iranian negotiations take a long, long time. The Persians are great negotiators. By the time they finish negotiating, Trump will, be in his last year in office. I'm exaggerating just a bit, But saying no to Trump is probably a bad idea. But we'll have to see. Um, we'll have to see. I'm not, again, the reality is, uh, the reality is the decision to pull out of the agreement in 2018 was a mistake, clearly a mistake, because since then, at that point, they didn't have enough for bombs. They had very, very little uranium at all at the time. They had amount to do experiments with, nothing more than that. Now they have enough uranium for 3 bombs. The biggest problem with the old agreement, the main problem, the problem that everyone talked about was the fact that part of it sunsetted after 10 years. And it was after 10 years, part of it was no longer in effect. Parts of it went on for 20 and parts of it never expired. So instead, we self-sunsetted it. Uh, Trump did it because Netanyahu wanted him to. Netanyahu wanted him to because it was one of his big campaign slogans to stop the terrible Iran agreement that Obama made. But the reality was it was working. No one claimed that the Iranians were not keeping to the agreement. Instead, here we are today. The Iranians have enough fissionable material for 3 bombs. Can we pull it all, push it all back? I don't know. Can we eliminate it with military means? We are at the edge of maybe being able to do it with support from America. The US could probably do it. I don't see where the US is these days. Starting a new war is not on top of Trump's agenda. We'll have to see. So that's where we stand with that. Let's just turn briefly to Lebanon. The agreement, I think we have another week and a half now to stay in Lebanon. The Trump administration has made it clear that that's a firm deadline for us to pull out. The Lebanese army is not stepping up to the level that we'd like, but they're stepping up to some extent. They have real limitations. The fact of the matter is that Hezbollah pays $5 a day and they pay $1 a day, and so it's hard to get recruits. But Hezbollah, on the other hand, can't get new arms. We are intercepting their arms that are trying to make it from Syria. The Syrians are also not cooperating with them, so maybe there's a chance of coming to an agreement, coming to a final agreement with Lebanon and ending this. Again, it's up to a large extent to the Lebanese to decide what they want. It's up to the Lebanese to push the Hezbollah out of their politics. I don't know whether they have the guts to do it. They might. That, of course, would be the best thing to happen for Lebanon and with the best thing that could happen for us, clearly, at this point. Anyway, we're at the halfway point. I'll take questions. I didn't discuss anything domestically, so if anyone has questions in that area, we can also talk a little bit about that. So just raise your hand and I'll be happy to answer. Paul.
Yeah, so you said a few moments ago that even the far left of the Israeli political spectrum would not accept a Palestinian state now. That seems eminently reasonable to me. But Saudi Arabia says that they won't negotiate with Israel about a long-term agreement without at least going toward a Palestinian state. So is that just an opening gambit by Saudi Arabia, or is Saudi Arabia trying to gut the whole thing from the start?
Okay. Before the war, before October 7th, clearly what all they wanted was some discussion and direction of a Palestinian state. We had hoped that that's sort of where they were now. I don't think they may not be there at the moment. Clearly, the war had an impact. It's a monarchy, but it has public opinion, and the street opinion. The Saudi people didn't care one bit about the Palestinians until this war. Al Jazeera made sure they were full of pictures of poor Palestinians being bombed, etc., etc., etc. And so the Saudi street has a certain level of concern, let's put it that way, towards the Palestinians. So will he be willing to come to an agreement without a Palestinian state? Without a Palestinian state, yes. Without some sort of direction towards, well, that's something else. I mean, look, the Israeli left and probably the center is willing to talk about the possibility of a Palestinian state down in the future if X, Y, and Z are met. I don't know if X, Y, and Z can ever be met, but at least you could talk about that as a possibility along the way. These are the steps that could happen if this happens, that happens, etc., etc. I think we go back in history. There were various points post Oslo where there were these different plans that to decrease the violence. 3 weeks without bombings, you name it, those sort of things, and we would go ahead with the next stage. We could be in the same sort of place again with the Saudis. But I think part of the reason we're seeing I think I mentioned this. Part of the reason we're seeing Netanyahu pulling back from stage two of the negotiating deal was he thought he could get a Saudi deal, and now he doesn't seem to be able to get a Saudi deal. Look, reality is Israelis were thrilled at how warm Netanyahu was received. All of those nice symbols that he got when he came to the Trump White House, but he actually got back nothing. The only thing he got out of it was probably a little less pressure towards making the second stage of the deal. I mean, yes, they're shipping arms to us and opened up that spigot, but they said that all along they would do that. So his trip really accomplished nothing of what he was hoping to accomplish vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia. Those are the two big topics that he wanted. The rest of us wanted pressure on him to go ahead with the hostage deal. We didn't get that either. So I don't know. I don't know where that goes. I don't expect a deal anytime soon. Um, I think, look, a deal with Saudi Arabia would have been really, really important to Israel 20 years ago. In terms of the economy, its economy was a more mixed, low tech, high tech economy. It needed investments, all those sort of things. 20 years ago, a deal with Saudi Arabia would have been really, really important, opening up the Saudi markets to us. Today, our high tech, our main consumers are Western Europe, the United States, and to some extent the Far East at this point. I'm sure some of the components and stuff end up in Saudi Arabia anyway. Um, and investments, we haven't had a problem with getting investments in the last few years, leaving aside this past year, even in the past year. There's no problem getting investments if you have companies that are worth investing in. So I'm, I don't know how important it is to Israel either, other than it's a nice thing to have. Michael, Ross.
At what stage do all the hostages come back with the agreements?
Okay, so the current agreement, I believe there's 17 more hostages to come back in this agreement, 17 or 19. There are 2 more weeks of three, and then there'll be 14, including bodies, as the part of the first agreement. This is the list of names that we presented to the Hamas a long time ago, of which at the time we presented the list, we thought all but probably the Bibas family were alive. Today, most of them are not most of them. Today, 8 of them are dead, supposedly. And then there's the second deal, which has the rest of the hostages, of which at least 60 to 70% of them are thought to be alive, would only happen in part of stage two of the deal. Stage two of the deal is basically the end of the war. We are supposed to pull out of the Philadelphia corridor, regardless of stage two, at the end of stage one, the week after the end of stage one. That's part of the deal. And the fear in Israel is that if it's clear that Bibi is not going to pull out of Philadelphia, which is what his office has sort of said, that at some point Hamas will say, well, why should we continue going on with stage one? We'll just stop stage one. And that's the fear. And at the moment, I was a little bit worried about this Saturday, but they got something big today. They got the fact that we pulled out of the Netzarim corridor. So that's something they really wanted. There's nothing they really want between now except continued aid trucks and also, of course, the Philadelphia corridor, which would happen afterwards. So I'm not sure what's going to happen in the coming weeks if we're going to see hostages released these next 2 weeks or not. I certainly hope so for their sake, for all of our sake, but I don't know.
Do
That
we
for,
get all the hostages back at the end of stage two?
yes, we do. We
Well,
got
why don't we do that and then
because
say to Hamas, right, we now want a full peace agreement, and if they refuse, we just go in with full force then.
okay, because of a very simple reason. Because Netanyahu loses his government. It's all this has all been about. Smotrich has made it very clear that if we retreat from the Philadelphia corridor, he will bring down the government.
But we're strong enough to go back in and get to the same position relatively easily after the end of stage two, aren't we? No matter
Of
what
course we
we've
can.
done.
It'd be very easy. We learned one thing. We learned two things in this war. We learned a lot of things, but one of the things is our armored corps can basically maneuver anywhere in Gaza within a period of 2 hours, and nothing can stop it. Before this war, we were afraid of RPGs and the fact that the tanks were susceptible. The reality is we lost a couple of tank and tank crews to IEDs, but none to RPGs. The active defense systems on these tanks work, and the reality is we could reconquer the Philadelphia corridor probably in 4 or 5 hours maximum. The same with Nitzarim corridor. Yes, nothing we can stop us from going back in a very short period of time.
So
What we
what's the
have to
timeline on stage two? If you did go to the end of stage two, are we talking about months or years?
No, we're talking about weeks if it actually happens. But we don't have his timeline because it hasn't been agreed to. The details have not been agreed to. There's stage two and then there's stage three. Stage three has to do with the rebuilding of Gaza and may include some bodies. I'm not quite sure. The body situation is a little bit unclear between stage two and stage three. I be honest with you, I mean, I feel for the families with the bodies, but much less concerned than live people. I mean, bodies are bodies, and we all, everyone deserves to be buried properly. But I don't know that, uh, again, much more important to get people who are alive out. That's what really counts, to live their lives and et cetera, et cetera. So
There's nobody saying what I'm saying. Let's do stage
everyone
two, and
say, and
then
most of Israel says that. Most of everyone who's not Bibi supporters is basically saying that. And of course, Smotrich and Ben Gvir and those people are not saying that. Um, Bibi can't have an end of the war. End of the war. Look, he's fighting tooth and nail against any national commission of inquiry. He refuses to have a commission of inquiry. He's doing everything he can to oppose it. He has no real reasons to oppose it. They made this whole ridiculousness. They can't trust the Supreme Court, so we can't have a national commission of inquiry because the chief, according to the law, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court doesn't head it, but appoints the people to head it. Now, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has become enemy number one of the right because enemy number of the right is the courts because the courts became the biggest enemy because they're trying Bibi. A lot of reasons for that we can go into. So they are using that as an excuse, but that's a nonsensical excuse because the Chief Justice isn't the one who does the investigation. I'm sure he can find people that everyone will agree with is neutral, but Bibi doesn't want a neutral investigation because we all know what the investigation is going to prove. We don't know some of the things we don't know, but we know in reality that one of the major reasons that that October 7th occurred was the fact that we thought Hamas was deterred, and we thought giving them money was the way to deter them. And so we kept on giving them lots and lots of money. And that was Bibi's plan. And so whatever the political reasons for October 7th, it's 100% on him, not to mention the fact that he's been the prime minister for most of the last 20 years. And the reality is the size of the army, all sorts of things that went wrong are on him because he was the man in charge. Truman's old statement that Bibi doesn't believe in the buck stops here. So that's where we stand. Josh.
What's keeping the Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad or whatever groups from taking over the Jordanian government? And yeah, like they're a majority in Jordan. So what's really holding them back from stepping up and commandeering that country and launching war or whatever they might want to do from Jordan to get things started?
Okay, two parts. Um, Two parts. Number one, I mean, what I just said, the Jordanian army is a relatively strong army. They're mostly Hashemite. They're mostly Bedouin. They're made of people who are loyal to the king, and they're what's holding back any ability for revolution, so to speak, in Jordan. The Palestinians, maybe 60% of the population, but that doesn't give them 60% of the people under arms. And the Jordanians have been very strong ever since, go all the way back in history to Black September in 1970 when the PLO landed 4 aircraft in the deserts of Jordan. And there was an attempt to take over Jordan, and Syria tried to join in. And the United States asked Israel to intervene and stop the Syrians, which the Israelis did effectively. And so ever since then, the Jordanians have made it very certain that there's no other people with arms in the country. Now, it's a big country, and I'm sure there are guerrilla groups here and there are people smuggling arms here and there, and all those sort of things. But the reality is the Jordanian army has it under control, as much as one can expect. Look, that's also the reason why the idea of sending more Palestinians to Jordan is a bad idea, because that'll tip the percentages even more in the wrong direction in terms of Jordan. We do not want an enemy on our border there, and we want the Jordanian Hashemite kingdom to continue. Luckily, however you want to look upon it, the Bedouins of Jordan also have lots of kids, just as the Palestinians do. So the demographics have not been changing too radically in that country. So I guess Paul again.
And so I saw something, I think it was in the Times of Israel, that Israel bombed a weapons cache, a weapons shipment. I think it was uh, bound for Hezbollah. I thought it was coming from Syria. Could you elaborate on that? Because I thought that the Syrian transit was literally 100% shut down.
Okay. The answer is yes, they bombed it. The Syrian transit is 90% shut down. But keep in mind, Syria is a big country. The new government is not fully in control of all of the country. It doesn't have an army that's large enough to control it all, and it's, the militias and there are all sorts of groups. So my guess is that, main shipments are not going to take place, but there's going to be attempts to smuggle. I mean, look, smugglers get through all sorts of things all the time. Um, so uh, they're trying to smuggle, and we're trying to stop them, as is the Syrian government. The Syrian government, like I said, has limited abilities. We eliminated all of their, their planes, etc. So they certainly can't do it from the air. So it's been degraded radically. It hasn't been eliminated. That's the reality. Caroline asked two questions in the chat. Who's going to be paying for rebuilding of Gaza? I have absolutely no idea. That's an interesting question. That's the big question. Um, that's the big question. Who's going to pay? The Gulf state's going to pay again. I mean, I wouldn't pay anything so that the money, they rebuilt Gaza twice, only to see the money being destroyed again. That gives, there's something to be said for rebuilding. It's good for the GNP. They're buying, materials, whatever else. I don't have an answer. I never had an answer to any of these. Let me put it this way. There are so many things that I have no answers to at this point in my life in terms of all these matters. One would think that with age comes wisdom. These issues have become more complex, more problematic, and I feel like I have less wisdom, more knowledge, but less wisdom as to how these things are going to work out in the future. And I have no idea who's going to pay for rebuilding Gaza, if anyone should even. Look, there's no question that, it would be nice if the Palestinians all decided, we can't live in Gaza. It's a terrible place. And, oh, we've been accepted in Paris. No, not Paris. Not accepted in Paris. Sweden? No, Sweden's had enough set of troubles with immigrants. They're never going to accept any more immigrants. I'll go right through all the list of places that they want to go. They don't want to go to places where, they talk about Somali. Who the heck would want to go to Somali? I mean, really? Gaza's bad, but I don't know, is Somali better than Gaza? I don't know. I'm not really rushing to go to Somalia if I'm a Gazan. Um, so who knows? I don't have the solutions. You also asked Carolyn whether elections are the solution. Well, clearly we need elections here. Clearly we need a new government. Part of the problem with this government, leaving aside all the policy issues and the fact that no one's responsible for anything, is the fact this government barely functions in so many different areas. It has incompetent people in so many different areas. As a defense minister, should never have been defense minister right now. The length of incompetent people running ministries, as a finance minister who has absolutely no idea about finance, just put one of his close friends to be his director general, whose knowledge was he was an army officer, and his major was archaeology in college, but he's in charge of the director general of the finance ministry. I mean, Paul, you want a job? We need someone who knows something about finance to be director ministry of the Ministry of Finance. Forget about ideology. We need competence. Bring us competent people to our ministries. People who know something about finance. And I'll go right through the list of all the ministries in this country who's not only the ministers, but whose director generals who are supposed to have some knowledge have absolutely no knowledge in the subject matter they're responsible for. Now, I know we're in the age where knowledge doesn't mean anything and expertise is a waste of time. That seems to be the going view in the world today. But that, expertise counts for something, I think at least. And certainly we need some people with some expertise in some areas. Claude.
So for those of us that don't live in Israel, Gallant's comments over the last few days were quite interesting. How believable is he? Has he been over the years? Because if he is believable, it just is another peg out of the Jenga castle of Netanyahu.
Look, I would say he's generally believable. I would say that every detail, some of it's self-serving, obviously. Anyone who's going to give an interview is first of all going to see it from your own views. So even if he's giving it exactly as he remembers it, no individual remembers such circumstances exactly. Our memories are always a little bit curved in our own, in our own perspective. Regardless, if you and I have a conversation, we disagree afterwards about that conversation, you'll remember it a little bit more towards, the positive things you said, and I'll remember it a little more towards the positive things I said. That's just human nature. So on that level, we can't take everything he said as the word of God. However, generally speaking, he's an honest guy, and what he says, a lot of it rings truth. And so I think much of what he said is true. How much, what percentage? 80, 90%, I think, probably correct. Look, it's a mess. Everything that took place was a mess. And it remains a mess because the same people are in control. I mean, that's the part that's just hard to understand and hard to believe. I always go back to the fact that after Pearl Harbor, the the commander of Pearl Harbor was relieved within a week, and the commander of the Pacific Fleet within, I don't know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I don't remember how many weeks, but it was pretty quickly. He was relieved as well. In our situation, for all sorts of reasons, I mean, Herzi Levy will be retiring finally a year and 4 months afterwards. The same with the commander of the Southern Command. And we can go on. And of course, the person really in charge is our prime minister. And the prime minister he gave a whole lecture on how, look, FDR didn't have to resign after Pearl Harbor, but we don't have a presidential system. We have a parliamentary system with a prime minister. If you look anywhere in the world, when governments make major, major errors, parliamentary systems, the governments resign. That's the nature of a parliamentary system. We don't have a presidential system. No one voted for Netanyahu. That's the saddest point. He talks as if he had gotten a mandate, but we had direct elections for prime ministers for three periods, and we stopped having them for a whole series of reasons that were a mistake back then.
So
So,
you're saying the present government leaked out the information, the hostages have sat there another 9 months,
oh, I would no doubt some people did. There's no question about that. There's no question. That
all
that
those
that that,
soldiers died, all those Palestinians died, all
that,
of them
that
were
part of what
done.
Gallen said is 100%. I mean, was reported in real time by other sources. He was not the first source of that. So there are other sources that collaborated that, and I have no question in my mind that we could have had an agreement back then. I can still remember, I think I talked about this. I guess it was the end of April, May when the Biden plan came out. So the Biden plan had come out, I think, on a Friday night, late Friday night. Friday evening, I was on TV with someone who was the previous commander of the Sayeret Matkal, the elite commander unit. We were on TV together, and we're both incredibly, incredibly pessimistic that, how are we going to get out of this mess, et cetera, et cetera. Things are stuck, et cetera. Overnight, Biden came out with his plan, which he said was Bibi's plan. The next day, we were both again on TV together, and we both together said, we were both optimistic finally. We both thought, oh, this is the Biden plan from Netanyahu. This is a deal that could solve the problem. We could come to a peace. We could avoid any more casualties and get back our hostages. Well, Netanyahu was expecting the Hamas to say no. They took a while to say yes, as again, some of the problems. We're not dealing with our best friends as negotiators against us. But eventually they said yes, and Netanyahu couldn't accept the fact they said yes. So that was the whole build thing and the whole leak of the documents and everything else. It's all been done by him to continue the war because it doesn't work in his favor politically. And he's great at one thing, remaining in power, getting into power, staying into power. That's his superpower, I'm afraid. Running the country, not so much. But staying in power, an incredible superpower. He's the best politician of the last century. But he's not the best leader of the last century. And unfortunately, we need both one of these years. Okay, anybody? Oh, and Paul, you asked to get a hand again. Paul? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Last call. Okay, so thank you all once again. Once again, any of you who are not paid, would love for you to become paid users. We'll continue these on a 2-week basis. Unfortunately, it's not getting boring around here. I will try one of these weeks. I'm hoping maybe the next week we'll put our first restaurant review back in to at least reflect a little bit of some normalcy. There isn't real normalcy at this point. Some other reviews, and we'll have some video interviews coming up in the next couple of weeks too to keep it interesting. But I'm afraid our government and our situation will unfortunately keep it interesting as well. So again, thank you all, and look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks.